Hello, and welcome to the Black History Month webinar series in Alzheimer's and Genetics. I'm Jagan Pillai, the director of the Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. This is a multi-institutional collaboration between the Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, CASE, Western Reserve, and Cleveland VA. The significant burden of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias affecting people now and expected to increase in the coming decades, we need solutions at different levels to address it, from better science to more community engagement. This center is federally funded by the National Institute of Health to spearhead Alzheimer's disease research in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio with outreach and education efforts, in addition to research. Understanding the role for genetics and family history in Alzheimer's disease and related dementia risk and finding ways to mitigate it is one of the areas of research interest at the center. Within the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Steven Rayo, an investigator at the center, is leading efforts to see if people carrying a risk gene for Alzheimer's disease, called ApoE4, respond differently to preventative strategies like exercise. While other researchers at the Genomic Medicine Institute, Dr. Ignacio Mata and Dr. Russ Bowler, are leading efforts towards understanding the genetics of other neurodegenerative diseases. Dr. Jonathan Haynes leads similar efforts to understand the genetics of Alzheimer's disease at Case Western Reserve. This is an exciting area of future progress that we look forward to. I hope you will get to know more about the links between Alzheimer's disease and genetics and have your questions answered in this session. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and happy Black History Month. I am Imani Capri, and I will be your host and moderator tonight for our first webinar as part of the 4th annual Black History Month webinar series. I am the creator and host of the international award-winning radio show Conversations in Courage with Imani Capri, which currently airs on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on 95.9 FM WOVU Cleveland, and I am also currently the managing editor for the Cleveland Observer. I am super excited to join you this evening and am looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have with our esteemed doctors who are on our panelist this evening. This year's program is presented by the Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, or CADRC. This federally funded grant was awarded to the Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, Case Western Reserve University, the Louis Stokes VA, and Metro Health Medical Center to work together as a research center without walls to study Alzheimer's disease and memory loss. I will be hosting 3 of the 4 weekly webinar sessions, each of which will take place on Thursdays right here at 6 p.m. Each week, we will begin with a 5 to 10 minute celebratory presentation of African American pioneers to highlight their accomplishments. After the presentations, we will delve into the topic of the week with our esteemed panelists, followed by a question and answer session from you, our audience. We would like for this to be interactive, so if you have any questions to our audience participants, please make sure that you write them in the chat. All webinars will be recorded, and the links will be sent to you following each webinar. So this week's topic focuses on genetics and Alzheimer's disease. Our panelists this week are Dr. Joanne Allard and Dr. Courtney Marshall. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce Gordon Williams, who will present the celebratory presentation for tonight's webinar. But let me tell you a little bit about Gordon first. Gordon Williams was raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and obtained his BA in psychology at Cleveland State University. He was first introduced to the field during his time in undergrad working with Dr. Kenneth Vail, focusing on existential psychology research from 2014 to 2016. From there, he was hired at University Hospitals in the Clinical Research Center as a clinical research coordinator in 2018, and finally settled in the Neurological Institute Clinical Trials Unit, focusing on stroke as well as brain health and memory, the department in which he currently resides. So Gordon, I'm tossing it over to you.
Awesome, great. Thanks so much, Imani. Can everyone hear me okay? And I'm going to be sharing my presentation shortly. Awesome. So once again, good evening, and thank you all so much for joining us for our first Black History Month webinar. Today's historical perspective presentation will be on Dr. James E. Bowman, Jr., professor and physician specializing in pathology and genetics, which is what we'll be discussing as our main subject this evening. So, Dr. Bowman was born February 5th, which was just yesterday, in Washington, D.C., as the eldest of 5 children. His mother was a homemaker, and his father was a dentist. His father did initially want him to follow in dentistry. However, he ended up going to medical school. He attended Dunbar High School, staying in Washington, D.C., which was America's first public high school for Black students. He went on to earn his undergraduate and medical degrees from historically Black college, Howard University. In 1943, Bowman enlisted to the U.S. Army in order to take advantage in the condensed 3-year program at Howard University College of Medicine. After completing an internship at Friedman, he moved to Chicago and became the first Black resident at St. Luke's Hospital from 1947 to 1952. During this time, he married his wife, Barbara Taylor, in 1950. Dr. Bowman was drafted again in 1953 and spent time in Denver as the chief of medical nutrition in the lab at the Army Hospital. Citing frustration at segregation, Bowman and his wife moved to Iran in 1955. While in Iran, Bowman led the Nezameh Hospital pathology program and studied multiple diseases that he had not experienced in his time in the United States, including smallpox, brucellosis, rabies, and favism. The study of genetic diseases enabled Dr. Bowman to travel to Mexico, Ghana, Nigeria, and London as well to collect blood samples and continue his research in diverse populations. The reason that's so important is because you want to have diverse populations when you're doing medical research, so it's applicable, the treatments can be used for everyone. In 1962, Bowman joined the faculty at the University of Chicago as the assistant professor and director of the blood bank. His previous work during his travels made him an expert at detecting abnormalities in blood samples. By 1967, he was promoted to associate professor and then a full-time professor in 1971, making him the first Black tenured faculty member at the University of Chicago. In 1972, the National Sickle Cell Anemia Control Act passed Congress and was signed by President Nixon. It was a federal program directed towards education, counseling, research, treatment, and voluntary screening. This was important because sickle cell disease primarily affects people of African descent. Dr. Bowman directed the Comprehensive Sickle Cell Center of the University of Chicago, funded via the National Institutes of Health. He originally had reservations about the Act's passage due to fears of screenings being used for eugenics movements. However, he was placed on a federal review committee to oversee the screenings. Last, Dr. Bowman's work led to 19 research studies being published over the course of his career. He was a pioneer in research ethics and public policy. He ended up passing in September 28th in 2011 at the age of 88. Dr. Bowman was married to educator Barbara Bowman, and they did have one daughter named Valerie Bowman Jarrett, who ended up being a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. Last but not least, these are the sources that I ended up utilizing. And last but not least, this is my contact info if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you all so much for your time, and I'll pass it back to Imani.
Thank you, Gordon. What great information about Dr. Bowman. I know that was my first time. I'm not a scientist or doctor for all of you who are here, so that was definitely enlightening for me to learn about Dr. Bowman. Now it is my great honor to introduce our panelists this evening. First, we'll start with Dr. Joanne Allard. Dr. Allard is an associate professor and the director of graduate studies in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics at Howard University College of Medicine in Washington, D.C. She began her academic journey at Howard University, earning both a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering and a PhD in physiology. She further advanced her expertise during a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute on Aging, where she studied the effects of dietary interventions and exercise on cognitive function and health span using transgenic mouse models of Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Allard's research focuses on understanding brain aging and neural protection. She investigates how behavioral strategies such as physical exercise, dietary interventions, and nutraceuticals can mitigate age-related neurological impairments. Her work also explores the role of genetic polymorphisms associated with Alzheimer's disease risk in influencing the effectiveness of neuroprotective strategies. Beyond her research, Dr. Allard significantly contributes to education and service, actively shaping the next generation of scientists. She directs the NIH-funded Howard University Enhancing Research in Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementias Post-Baccalaureate Research Education Program, which aims to increase diversity among graduates who transition into research-centered careers in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Her commitment to fostering diversity in scientific research is evident through her mentorship of numerous students from diverse backgrounds, particularly those from underrepresented groups in biomedical sciences. So welcome and thank you for joining us this evening, Dr. Allard.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We're happy to have you. Next, we have Dr. Courtney Marshall. Dr. Marshall is the Cressa Family Assistant Professor of Neuroscience at Wellesley College. She received her BS from Davidson College and PhD from Drexel University College of Medicine. Dr. Marshall performed her postdoctoral training under the tutelage of Dr. Virginia Lee in the Center for Neurodegenerative Disease Research at the University of Pennsylvania. The Marshall Lab investigates how pathological tau, or protein, aggregates, spreads, and impairs cognitive function in Alzheimer's disease. They utilize clinically relevant disease models to study the mechanistic role of glutamatergic NR2B subunit containing receptors with the purpose of identifying novel therapeutic targets. Her work has been supported by the NIH as well as private foundations such as the Bright Focus Foundation. Dr. Marshall has also received several awards and fellowships from various institutions, including the Society for Neuroscience, and currently serves as a member on the Board of Visitors at her alma mater. She aims to combine her passion for inclusive pedagogy with her interest in neurodegenerative research to train resilient scientists in pursuit of a better understanding of hypophosphorylated tau, or protein-associated symptoms. So, Dr. Courtney Marshall, welcome. We are happy to have both of you here with us today. You all's bios are impressive. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation here. Let me grab our questions. So let's delve right in. And again, to our audience, if you have questions that you would like to ask to our two doctors, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And our team here will share those questions with us so we can include them. So let's start off for both of you. What is dementia?
Well, okay, I can start. Oh, basically, dementia is a broad term, an overarching term for cognitive impairment that's severe enough that it significantly impacts someone's ability to do those everyday things like going shopping, cooking, paying the bills, dressing. So it impairs your memory, your learning, your reasoning, decision-making, even communication skills.
Okay.
But just to add to that, what a great point. It's really also not synonymous with Alzheimer's disease. So I think that usually sometimes those words get confused or used interchangeably. So notably, as Dr. Allard mentioned, dementia is going to be the symptoms when essentially Alzheimer's disease is going to be a disease. So you can have dementia associated with different diseases.
Okay, so that segues nicely into our next question, which is, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so Alzheimer's is just a specific disease that has dementia as its primary component, right? So it's the dementia that makes you not want to have this disease. But there are many other diseases. There's Parkinson's disease dementia, there's Lewy body dementia. There are many other diseases, vascular dementia that can cause dementia. Even traumatic brain injury can cause dementia. So there are just huge variant different conditions that can cause dementia. And Alzheimer's just happens to be the most dominant or the most frequent cause of dementia in those over the age of 65.
Okay. And what are genetics and how does that relate to dementia or this cognitive impairment that we call dementia?
Right. So if we want to think about genetics in the context of Alzheimer's disease specifically, you're going to have to kind of split up how we define Alzheimer's disease or how we diagnose Alzheimer's disease. I think we'll get into talking about risk factors that might be involved with that. So normally when we colloquially speak about Alzheimer's, we're usually referring to what we call sporadic Alzheimer's disease, which is different from familial Alzheimer's disease. So sporadic is normally the 95% of cases that affect individuals over the age of 65. That is going to have kind of its own narrative with genetic factors compared to the early onset familial Alzheimer's disease, which is going to affect individuals around 30 to 45 years of age.
Okay. Do you see this having a difference, or how does this differ between different populations, either ethnically and or maybe regionally?
So the genetic risk factors for dementia or for Alzheimer's disease definitely vary across the different ethnic and regional populations. And that would be really due to the genetic ancestry, even the environmental influences, and then of course the lifestyle or the behaviors of that person. So in order to really get a full picture of the disease, it's really important to consider all these different populations that have all of these different genetics and environmental and lifestyle influences.
Right. So in that context, if we think about all the variations of genetic mutations or variations that we can kind of inherit from our family members, whether it's in the context of familial Alzheimer's, where we normally talk about something like ApoE4. I think we mentioned that when we were talking private before the webinar started. And then if we think about familial Alzheimer's, we have more specifically inherited genetic mutations. Those are more so the ones that are more popular, kind of involved with something we call the amyloid precursor protein. So both will either increase your likelihood or make you much more have a higher risk to develop Alzheimer's disease. But if we think about that in the context of different backgrounds genetically, I think more recent research has shown that there can be differences with these genetic variations where some might be more common in some populations and confer an increase in likelihood of Alzheimer's disease diagnosis, whereas others may not have the same effect in other populations or racial populations specifically. We don't know yet if that's a matter of it's so rare in certain populations that it doesn't confer a risk, or if it's some other combination of factors.
Yeah, I think it might be important to clarify that there are Alzheimer's disease genes or gene mutations that I would say almost guarantee that you will get the disease by a certain age, like by age 50. But this is what we call familial or early onset Alzheimer's disease, and this is maybe 1-2% of the total population that even gets the disease. So it's a very small part of the population that ends up generating Alzheimer's disease. But it's a very early onset, where other genes like the ApoE4 variant that will confer Alzheimer's disease, if it does, because just because you have that variant, it just means that you're at higher risk. It does not mean that you will get the disease. But
Okay.
if you do get it, it would be at a much later age.
What are the major genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias?
So again, the ApoE4, again, so the apolipoprotein E, right? It's a protein and its function in the body is really, it's a lipid transporter, right? So
Okay.
it takes lipids back and forth through your body, put it where it belongs, removes it from where it doesn't belong. But we humans have 3 different variants of this gene. We have ApoE2, ApoE3, or the ApoE4 variant. And the ApoE3 variant of this gene is considered your normal risk. And most people are carry the ApoE3 or carry 2 alleles of, you get one from your mom, you get one from your dad. So they would carry 2 ApoE3 alleles, and that would be what we normalize everything to. But if you have the ApoE4 allele, even just one of that, then that confers a much higher risk, a much higher chance of developing Alzheimer's disease later in life. The ApoE2 on the other spectrum actually lowers your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease.
What determines how much a person may have the influence of the ApoE4 or not?
Yeah, so if you think about getting 2 alleles, again, one from one parent, one from another, if we're just thinking about donor material, essentially you're going to have a pair, but it's a matter of having identical pairs, ApoE2 and ApoE2, or ApoE2 and ApoE3, and so forth and so on, and the different combinations of the variants that Dr. Allard mentioned. So it's really just what you kind of get from your parents and the
Okay.
combination of the 2 that you have.
Okay, we have some questions here I'm going to share. I see a couple popped up in the chat. Are there specific tests that one can request to, I think that popped down. Let me see here.
To
Are there
find out,
specific, are there specific tests one can request to specifically identify those genes or proteins?
Yes.
absolutely, yes. You can get genotyped, absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, when you do those, I don't know, 21 and you go through
21andMe?
Yeah,
Yeah.
21andMe, they'll tell you
Mhm.
what your ApoE genotype is. I have a friend that recently did that and found out she had 2 alleles of the ApoE4. So,
Okay. Are there environmental things? So let's say someone has that test, right? Because if I was listening closely, I believe you said that just because you have the presence of those doesn't necessarily mean that that means you will automatically get Alzheimer's, right? So are there environmental things or other things within the body that flip those ApoE4s on or off?
It's alternative splicing that's going to actually direct which allele you're going to get. But once you have it, you can't necessarily change that. But that's what helps kind of determine what goes into your genetics in that case. But notably, there is a difference between that more specifically inheritable gene that almost precisely confers that you will get a diagnosis at an earlier age. That's going to be more so that familial early onset Alzheimer's, where you can have both ApoE4 alleles and still not necessarily be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So it's going to increase your susceptibility, but not necessarily be a guaranteed or yield a guaranteed diagnosis.
yeah, and many studies are showing there are lifestyle changes that you can do to sort of decrease your risk, even though you're ApoE4. There are lots of studies on diets. Mediterranean diets seem to be having a great effect. And of course, exercise. Definitely everyone, of course, should be active, right? But if you're carrying an ApoE4 allele, then, that's even more motivation to really keep an active lifestyle with exercise as part of your daily routine. And in fact, many studies are showing that exercise is particularly effective for those that carry the ApoE4 allele. They see robust changes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a little offbeat of our questions, but I want to ask and find out, is this a myth or is there any fact to it, right? Especially for those of us who listen to things on YouTube or scrolling through social media. I have seen, I think it's some doctor on Instagram who recommends like all these different things you should avoid. And one thing I heard him say was, you want to try to not use aluminum very much because the presence of aluminum in your bloodstream, or the more you use it, increase your chance for something like Alzheimer's. Is this a myth or is there some type of scientific support or research done on aluminum and any connection to dementia or Alzheimer's?
Well, I don't know any research specifically on aluminum. I haven't tried to look for it. So
Okay.
that's not to say that it's not out there, but definitely different metals in our bodies. There's a balance, of course, can impact inflammation, the level of inflammation in our body. And inflammation is a huge part of many neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's disease, right? And so not to give inflammation a completely bad name, because it has its place and it has its benefits, but when you're chronically inflamed, then you're going to impact the function of different proteins, the way that they fold. They have an ideal shape. Proteins have an ideal shape that they need to be at in order to function properly. And inflammation can alter the shape of our proteins and ultimately the function of these proteins. And so I will just say broadly, yes, different metal toxicities can have an impact on our bodies, increasing inflammation.
I think we probably could come back to a little bit more conversation about chronic inflammation when we get into talking about some of the lifestyle things that may contribute to lowering or increasing risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. But I want to ask you ladies now, in the layman terms, can you define for us what is epigenetics and what role epigenetics can play in Alzheimer's disease and or related dementias?
Okay, well, epigenetics really is the study of how our inherited genes, how we inherit different alterations in the genes that we express without altering the actual DNA sequence that encodes these genes. So we have a specific DNA sequence that encodes the genes. And so we know that that's the gene we have. We have ApoE3, or we have ApoE4, or we have ApoE2. That's not going to change. But how much of this gene that actually gets transcribed and translated into protein can be changed through what we call these epigenetic regulations. So there's methylation and acetylation, histone. Well, we don't have to go into all that, but basically it's something that alters how these genes are expressed. They can be turned on or they can be turned off through epigenetic mechanisms. And you can actually inherit these epigenetic codes, I should say, for the genes.
Okay.
I don't know if Dr. Marshall has something to add to that.
Oh, just that in a different lifetime, I would have focused on epigenetics as well. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it's really very interesting. There are studies that show, for instance, what the mom does while they're pregnant, even though it's not changing the DNA, it will change what proteins and how they're expressed in the baby, and it can change it. It can change that expression for the lifetime or for many, many years of that child when they're outside, their independent bodies, and they're still benefiting or maybe not benefiting from those epigenetic changes that happen.
How would you
Interesting thing.
so I do have a question from our audience that I will ask here shortly, but along the lines of epigenetics, what would you speak to in terms of, especially in our culture and communities, sometimes you hear people speak casually about trauma that may have been inherited from our ancestors. What what role from your professional and your cultural lens do you feel that is valid? And if it is valid, are there things that we can do within the African American culture to be mindful of how some of that information that may have carried in our DNA, how much we feed into it or not, and how that may or may not affect our health?
Okay, so, yeah, this is, so I don't study trauma and
Okay.
the epigenetics of trauma, but I will say that without being someone who studies it, I believe that there's something absolutely to that. Stress is an epigenetic modifier, right? Emotional stress that can be passed down. It can change how our bodies express genes that are part of those stress pathways potentially, right? And so give us potentially have some proteins turned on that may inhibit, but that may affect our health negatively, right? Because of this stress that has been passed on. I believe that there could be something to that. I don't know firsthand any specific research about that, but even just changing proteins that maybe affect the way that we sleep, right? How we sleep, that can have a profound effect on our brain. Of course, when you're sleeping, a lot of things are happening. You're removing toxins from your brain. There's the glymphatic system that received a lot of news impact several years ago, showing that during deep sleep, we are able to remove a lot of toxins, including those proteins that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. So, if we are not handling stress well, and then that can impact our sleep and then ultimately impact how our body is able to take care of these detrimental proteins in our body. I definitely feel epigenetics could have a role, long-reaching role, maybe not directly, but yes.
Thank you. Dr. Marshall, did you have something before we go to an audience question?
I was only thinking in the concept of, I don't actually study epigenetics and I don't study those specific stress changes that we can maybe align with your question about trauma. But when I hear it, I think about my lens as a scientist, also a Black woman. But I think of it in terms of, okay, right, there are the studies on stress that have used animal models that have actually used specific methods and behavioral techniques to induce stress in this laboratory experiment, which is very different than if we were culturally speaking about inherited trauma in that colloquial way. That's not necessarily what we're studying. So I feel like there should be some maybe change in how we're talking about it in that context culturally. If we're thinking about the science behind it, maybe we need to shift our lens slightly.
Okay. Thank you both. So we have a question from one of our audience members said, I heard environment can factor into the development of Alzheimer's. Can someone please say more on this? They're asking how environment could factor into developing Alzheimer's.
I think
Go ahead.
briefly, and I think we have some questions that maybe speak a little bit more towards the environment or the nurture side of nature versus nurture, where there are things that we can experience in life or do in life that can that we talk more so in terms of how can it be helpful in slowing our cognitive decline. So I know a little bit more about how to use what we do as a helpful approach to slow down decline or to maybe alleviate some changes that we see behaviorally or mentally with Alzheimer's disease. I know slightly less about what we might do environmentally and experientially to cause it. It's kind of the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in general, you can be in an environment where that can potentially increase your levels of inflammation, right? So you can be in an environment, there are factories all over and they're not, it can affect the water, it can affect the air quality, all of these things. And then ultimately you're breathing it in, can ultimately trigger some immune response, some inflammatory response. And if you're in that environment constantly for a number of years, then yes, absolutely, that can change your gene expression, that can ultimately increase inflammation and who knows what else, and increase your risk for Alzheimer's or any number of diseases, cancer, anything. I mean, environment is something that changes epigenetics, and yeah, so absolutely it can impact your risk for Alzheimer's disease.
So one theme I'm hearing in between what you're saying is it's important for us to be mindful about how much stress is impacting us because that can play a big role on our health. Dr. Allard, how might exercise help lower one's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease?
Well, I mean, exercise might be the best lifestyle intervention for preventing or at least delaying Alzheimer's disease and many other causes of dementia. We've known for several decades now, I mean, for a long time, how powerful exercise is for the heart, for the cardiovascular system. And in general, if it's good for the heart, it's great for the brain, right? So we know exercise is powerful for our vascular system. It helps to prevent diseases like atherosclerosis. And then, of course, we have the blood vessels in the brain, cerebrovascular diseases. We know that exercise decreases fat. Exercise reduces chronic inflammation. Lots of studies are showing that it promotes also enhanced synaptic plasticity, which is really important for learning and memory and at every age. There's neurogenesis, so synthesis of new cells in the brain. Exercise induces that, and it induces it at every age. I mean, of course, it's best when you're young, but even in the elderly, exercise can increase synaptic plasticity and neurogenesis. It promotes mitochondrial health, right? So our mitochondria, our healthy mitochondria give us a lot of ATP, so we have the energy, our cells are able to do exactly what they need to do and function well. And our exercise really enhances the function of our mitochondria, increases the synthesis of new mitochondria. And of course, exercise also helps us to sleep well, which I said will be very, very important for clearing out all of those toxins in our brain. So if we don't get good sleep, we're not going to clear out those plaques and all of those other toxins that might be building up there. Exercise definitely helps us to have a great sleep profile. And then, of course, there are so many different conditions, comorbidities, we call them, that increase risk of Alzheimer's disease, or many Alzheimer's disease will have these conditions as well. Hypertension, we're talking about hypertension, diabetes, right? So glucose regulation, I mentioned atherosclerosis already, but exercise really helps you to manage these conditions, even without medication. And so it's just powerful. Even depression. There have been some studies done many decades ago, even comparing exercise, rigorous exercise, and some antidepressant medications, showing in many people that exercise was actually better. If they can maintain it, it actually had longer lasting, more powerful effects than some of those antidepressive medications. And depression is also a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So
I've also, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say I noticed many of us at the top of a new year make some resolutions or set some new goals. So one of mine has been being in the gym more frequently. And I noticed that the mornings where I get up and work out before I start work at like 6 a.m., my brain feels like I
Yeah.
am so much more focused. It's easier to concentrate. I do feel like I have more energy. So I am appreciating what you are emphasizing for us about the effect of exercise on our brain health and
Yeah,
how
it's
important
amazing.
it
It
is.
just, sometimes it's difficult to find the time in the day to do it,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And sometimes, we're all humans. Sometimes you're just not motivated to do it, even though you know how powerful it is. And so, studying motivation might also be a good thing to help people to maintain that sort of healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely. We have another question, and then we'll go to an audience question. So there's increased research and conversation about the mind-body connection,
Uh-huh.
and anybody can answer this. Do you believe that mindfulness practices, such as meditation, can play a significant role in preventing or helping to heal these brain diseases?
So I can view mindfulness kind of in a more general term. I think that there are different things you can do to be present in that moment. So in addition to certainly keeping up with your physical health to maintain your brain health and heart health and all the things that are definitely related, I think that it's very important, especially as we age, to focus on stimulating ourselves mentally as well as socially. So I would kind of wrap the way I view mindfulness in that context, where there have certainly been a lot of really great studies that show that elderly individuals that are lonelier than their age-matched counterparts are actually going to demonstrate a lower baseline cognition if there are different assays that measure that. And that over a longitudinal study, the decline of your cognitive rate, how fast you actually go from mild cognitive impairment to dementia, how fast you go from that cognitive impairment interfering with some of your activities versus every single day daily activities, is actually going to be faster for individuals that show markers, I guess we can call that, of loneliness. So really socially stimulating yourself is really helpful in kind of slowing that decline or kind of staving that off for as long as possible. And then outside of social stimulation, of course, there's all the talk usually of focusing on things like crossword puzzles or Sudoku, or you name it, whatever your kind of cup of tea is for that. And I think that there's also been research that shows it's not just things like the really incredibly challenging New York Times crossword puzzles that I struggle with, but even artistic abilities. So people that actually take time to craft, which I think is its own form of meditation, depending on how you're looking at
Sure.
it. So depending on how you view it, there actually has been a lot of really great research that shows that it's helpful.
Okay. I've done some, usually when people think about meditation, we often think about, sitting like this and, but there are some meditations that I have done that were like drawing meditation to music. So that's encouraging to hear that things like this can also be positive for our brain health. We have a question that is also in our agenda and from someone in the audience. They're asking, does gut health affect risk for Alzheimer's? And I would add on to that, can you also explain what the brain gut axis is and any connections between brain gut axis and potential influence on development of Alzheimer's or dementia?
Yeah, well, the gut-brain axis is really a two-way communication system between our gastrointestinal tract and our central nervous system. And so disruptions in this communication have been implicated in Alzheimer's disease and other neurological conditions. So an inflamed gut can lead to an inflamed brain. And you know, the gut-brain axis, really, it includes neural pathways, you know, via the vagus nerve and other connections, and endocrine factors that are produced and secreted by the gut, like ghrelin. That's a hunger hormone. It signals, hey, there's nothing down here. It's time to eat. So that signal goes to the hypothalamus because that's where that hunger signal originates from. So yeah, the gut microbiome can produce many, many metabolites, right? So we have trillions of little bacteria, virus, all these organisms that aren't actually part of our human bodies that are down there in our guts, and they're metabolizing some of the foods, things that are down there, and they're producing their own products, and these products can impact our health, our overall body health, as well as our brain health. They might not all go into the brain, they might produce something else that then is able to travel to the brain. Like for instance, short chain fatty acids. It's one of those, some of our healthier bacteria will produce, especially if you're eating a high fiber diet, lots of vegetables and things like that. You'll produce some short chain fatty acids, and then those can go into the brain and really have some tremendous beneficial effects, anti-inflammatory effects in particular, and they can also support the function of our mitochondria in our brain.
Let's see here. We talked about APOE4 a little bit. It says APOE has been identified as a possible risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Can you tell us, or what can you tell us about what can you tell us about that, and how might that risk differ between different ethnic groups?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, there's been a little bit more research with added diverse communities and participants that have shown that different groups will have different frequencies of having this homozygous or heterozygous allele, so double or single copies of APOE4. So if we compare an African-American population to other racial backgrounds, I think that I have higher rates of having one or two copies of that allele compared to other groups.
Yeah, I will just add to that that some relatively recent studies are showing that the APOE4 allele actually doesn't have as dramatic an impact on the risk for Alzheimer's disease in African American population as it does in the Caucasian or the white population. So that's another interesting tidbit that and also an important reason why we need to have more diversity in these studies, more Black people in these studies, so that we can learn about these things, because it might mean that we should be paying attention to some different things in the Black population. That's not to say, of course, that APOE4 is not still a high risk factor for it. Absolutely is, but not as high as the white population. But there's another gene that's similar to APOE in terms of its function, and that's the ABCA7 gene. And that gene has different mutations in it also. And I think some recent research, or maybe even not so recent, shows that that gene is probably just as strong, or maybe even a stronger risk factor for Alzheimer's disease in the Black population and the African American population. So definitely different risk factors depending on race or ethnicity, which is why we need to have us in those studies.
What's fascinating is that there's differences in how frequent it is and how they can confer with groups. But generally speaking, they're usually under the same umbrella of functions of protein. So as you mentioned, they kind of work in the same kind of category of lipid transport or other categories of protein function, but they're slightly different genes, or they confer them differently. But there's still this umbrella of they all kind of organize a similar function.
Absolutely.
Okay. Dr. Marshall, how can we help contribute to genetics research as it relates to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias?
Attending talks like this is a great start. So thank you for joining us tonight. But I also, most of my research is with either animal models or using postmortem samples. So I very graciously work with tissue that has been procured from individuals that have donated their brain after passing. So I think that there's the concept of donations with tissue. If you or you know someone that might be in this category of individuals, there's also prior to donating tissue, just participating in longitudinal studies. So there's various centers across the country or hospitals that will work with patients in a clinical setting to work with them over time. It's a progressive disease. Things change over time. It's important to collect information regarding that. And then there are neuropathological centers that will work with collecting actual tissue that then people like myself can study and hopefully get more information that can help us in more an equitable manner.
We have another question from the audience. Can you share how the MIND and Mediterranean diets can be helpful and reduce risks of Alzheimer's and other dementias?
Well,
I don't know anything about that diet, but you might.
yeah, so like I mentioned before, diet, what you eat, what you put into your gastrointestinal tract absolutely has a huge influence on your microbiome. And it increases the diversity, which is the #1 way to increase the health of your microbiome. So a healthy microbiome is a very diverse microbiome, right? So you want to eat lots of different healthy, high fiber foods, which I believe is what the Mediterranean diet, as well as I'm not as familiar with the MIND diet specifically, but I'm imagining it's something along those lines.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, diet, healthy diets, a variety of healthy whole food diet will have some beneficial effects on the gut that will impact the brain and whole body health, really, the whole.
Before we go to any final questions and wrap up, I just want to ask if you could, for our audience benefit and anybody that may see the recording, I wrote down what I felt like were some tips that you were offering us to help support our brain health, but I'm not the doctor. So I'm not going, I think I take great notes, but I want to open it up to you all to, if you could give us a quick like punch list of a few things that we can be mindful of in our day-to-day life. We know exercise is up there at the top, but what are some other practical things that we can do to take care of our brain health?
We'll definitely focus on having a good sleep, having a regular sleep pattern, making sure that you're getting your ideal 7 to 8 hours, that you're sleeping at the right times of the day. That's going to be tremendous. So do anything that you need to get that sleep well. It's one thing.
So definitely encourage that sleep. Again, you need to hit certain types of sleep to actually clear things out of your system. It's a really great way to do that, and very low effort on your part.
Yeah.
Really easy.
Who doesn't want to sleep?
My motivation for sleep is much higher than going to the gym. But both are helpful. To Tyann, I see one of the questions is about the Black community and other diseases that are prevalent in the community and Alzheimer's. And I think it was briefly mentioned before that brain health is heart health, is gut health. And there's kind of this holistic approach to all these organs talking and communicating, working with each other. And within our community, we have to consider things like diabetes and heart health, and to not really view them separately, I think is a good approach.
Yeah.
To start leading our lives, recognizing that they're all literally actually talking to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, we have one more question before we wrap up.
I'm just going to chime in. There were 2 questions that were typed in the Q&A. One was about requesting cognitive testing for an elder parent. And so doctors Appleby and Shwesta, who were on the webinar, graciously answered, saying that you can always check with your PCP about cognitive testing. That would be the first step. And any type of testing is always going to be protected under HIPAA. So there should be no concern for that. And then somebody asked specifically about cerebral amyloid angiopathy. The concern is for children and grandchildren to determine the risk for developing this as well. And as we type in the response, most people refer to it as CAA, and it is not genetic. But they should speak to their clinician, to her clinician, to see if a genetic cause is suspected. So these are really good questions, and we really appreciate it. I just wanted to kind of address them online as well.
Thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes left, and there is one more question I'm seeing in the chat here. What are some dementia resources for Black families in Cleveland? I think Susie said we'll be sending out some resources about that. Okay, so doctors, are there anything that we didn't cover that you want to make sure that we communicate before we wrap up?
Oh, I can't think of anything else offhand.
This was informative. I appreciate having this conversation with you. One of the things that I learned is I didn't know that sleeping actually helps clear toxins from your brain. So I'm going to be much more mindful about my sleep hygiene. I'm familiar with the term sleep hygiene. But I guess I would encourage everyone here who may not be a scientist or medical professional, let's prioritize our exercise, making sure that we're getting good sleep, that we're eating well. We have 5 minutes. Dr. Allard, Dr. Marshall, what are some of the things that we should avoid eating to keep that like inflammation down? Right? Because you could say Mediterranean and people know fruits, vegetables, fish, maybe some light dairy. But sometimes when we think about the inflammatory stuff, like eating a whole bag of Doritos
Yeah, I think
every
really
other day.
highly processed foods,
Right.
I'm just going to say stay away from the highly processed things. Many of those things we don't even know all the things that they're doing to us and our microbiome. So
I'm not a medical doctor, so do I tell myself to do all things in moderation? But
yeah. Outside of that, I'm not going to say much because I eat a lot of things that I probably shouldn't eat, but I try not to do it all the time.
Is there another word that you could also give us before we close out about, managing some of that emotional stress? I know that was something else that came up in our conversation. We are definitely in a time where a lot of people are feeling heightened emotional stress. We're not going to get into why, but what tips might you have to offer for us in thinking about our day-to-day habits? For instance, right? Like some of us are emotional eaters. I notice when I feel a little bit more stressed, I might tend to gravitate to more sugary foods, but that sugary stuff can cause more inflammation, right? And that's not the best way to handle emotional stress.
Right. Especially if you're having it late in the day. Yeah, especially if you're having it late.
Well, I'll do another plug towards stimulating yourself socially. I think that community is a really important thing. I think we're social creatures. I think it helps to have a great support system. So I would encourage others as well as myself to lean on those around you.
Yeah, don't isolate. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you to all of the 50, I thought I saw us up to maybe 54 people at one point. Thank all of you for joining us this evening. That's going to wrap up our webinar tonight, but please join us next week for our discussion on Caregiving 101. Following tonight's webinar, you will receive the link to a resource packet for the series, as well as a feedback survey in your email. So make sure you check your email. We encourage you to fill out the feedback survey following each webinar. Your feedback helps to create the topics in future presentations such as these. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
week. Bye-bye.